And I will say good afternoon, everyone. I'm P. Muzi Branch, Director of Arts and Healthcare Department at VCU Health. That's where we integrate the arts into the healing process. I want to welcome all who have joined us for this webinar commemorating and celebrating the Juneteenth national holiday. This program is being presented by the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Arts in Healthcare. Now, at this time, I'd like to introduce Ms. Janine Bell, who will perform a libation ritual. Now, Ms. Bell is the founder and president of Elegba Folklore Society, Incorporated. She is an artist, producer, folklorist, a cultural historian, and an arts administrator. Elegba Folklore Society operates a cultural center located in downtown Richmond and makes an educational, social, economic, and spiritual impact on the city. Ms. Bell produces through the society the annual Juneteenth celebration. It's a freedom celebration. Now, their celebration is going to be held on Sunday, June 26th at Richmond's African Burial Ground, 1540 East Broad Street. They also produce the Down Home Family Reunion and the Capital City Kwanzaa. The society also offers performances in African dance, music, and theater. Now, Ms. Bell is a recipient of several awards and honors, including the Teresa Pollock Prize for Excellence in the Arts, the 2019 Richmond History Maker Award, recognition as a 2020 Person of the Year by the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and a recipient of the 2022 Martin Luther King Jr. Community Leaders Award for Arts and Culture. Now, a little about the ceremony. The ceremonies and rituals keep us whole. In African societies, in many African descended societies, and among people of the earth who recognize the oneness of nature and paying homage to the ancestors is key to their wholeness. Now, we must honor our ancestors and honor those who have come before us, whose names we know, and also those whose names we don't know. Because it's for their energy that has brought us to this moment. And today, we pour libation. Please welcome Janine Bell of Elegba Folklore Society.
Good morning, all, and happy Juneteenth. I'll begin in the Yoruba language. Omi tutu, cool water. Ona tutu, cool road. Ile tutu, cool earth. Tutu laroye, tutu egun, the egun being the ancestral realm. Ibashe egun, we greet you, those who have disappeared. We pay homage to our ancestors, those who are fortunate to be buried in the soils of Africa, the cradle of civilization. Our first mothers and fathers, walking in attuned God light as co-creators of civilization, caretakers of the earth, and establishers of order. If you agree, we say Ashe, Ashe.
Ashe.
We pay homage to those who were the architects, the scientists, the educators, the agriculturalists, the mathematicians, the community builders, the spiritual leaders, the warriors, Ashe.
Ashe.
To those who were the natural caretakers of the earth's most precious minerals, Ashe.
Ashe.
We thank our ancestral navigators who embarked from the motherland to be the first to journey across the Atlantic to bring God-attuned culture that helped shape our world. Ashe.
Ashe.
We pay homage to our ancestors who were captured from their villages and homes, and who were transported through the Middle Passage, objectified as cargo, crowded together, lying on their backs, stacked on pallets, often with their heads between the legs of others, in feces, urine, blood, and death. Ashe.
Ashe.
We honor our ancestors whose transatlantic journey was 2 months or more, where order was sacrificed for filth, disdain, and profit motivations. Ashe.
Ashe.
We thank you, who were shackled ankle to ankle, wrist to wrist. You who fell or were thrown overboard. You who jumped, knowing in spirit that the water brought me and the water will take me home. Ashe.
Ashe.
We thank you, who in resilience began the creation of a new transnational identity within these ships, where Africans from different countries, regions, cultures, and with different languages grew into Pan-African oneness, a oneness that birthed a diaspora. We thank you, whose fortitude defended your survival, even still, to beget us, your children. Ashe.
Ashe.
We thank our ancestors whose bones rest in the earth in the Americas. We thank you who face the daily challenges of making sense out of a life of horrific, heinous enslavement, where enslavers prop themselves up on our backs in false notions of superiority that laid the basis for the systemic disparities we know today. Ashe.
Ashe.
We honor our foreparents, whose eternal rest was curtailed as the Medical College of Virginia organized itself. Ashe. We
Ashe.
remember our African family who fell victim to the callous objectification of medical research without ethics, who even in death could not sleep.
Ashe.
We honor you, whose unrequited physical and intellectual prowess created the universal foundation for our material world. Ashe.
Ashe.
In legacy, we thank you, who sacrificed yourselves even so in the face of the Black codes, the barbarity of the lynch mob, the storm of Jim Crow, and the resurgent, senseless violence of the police. Ashe.
Ashe.
We thank you, who in spite of and because of accomplished, you who even so excelled, created, influenced, improved, and loved, you who hoist us now. Ashe.
Ashe.
For we are spirit of your spirit. We are flesh of your flesh. We are bones of your bones. Ashe.
Ashe.
We thank you for your presence in this moment. We ask that the ear of spirit within us is tuned to hear truth. Ashe.
Ashe.
We ask for your continued guidance. Ashe.
Ashe.
We ask for your continued blessings. Ashe.
Ashe.
May all the ancestors whose names we know and whose names we don't be pleased. Ashe.
Ashe.
And so it is.
Thank you, Mrs. Bell. Thank you very much. That was beautiful. Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Harris Stuff. Program Manager of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at our wonderful health system here at Virginia Commonwealth University. I am so pleased that we are here together, and I appreciate each of you. Today we celebrate Juneteenth. Juneteenth celebrates the end of slavery in the United States. It is also known as Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, Juneteenth, Independence Day, and Black Independence Day. On June 19th, 1865, Union soldiers arrived in Galveston, Texas, and announced the end of the Civil War and the end of slavery. Although the Emancipation Proclamation came 2.5 years earlier, many enslavers continued to hold enslaved people of African descent captive after the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth is the oldest known US celebration of the end of slavery. Juneteenth is a day to reflect on both bondage and freedom, a day to both recognize pain and purpose. It is an equal measure of remembrance of both the long, hard fight of slavery and, yes, defeat, as well as the beautiful celebration of the promise of a brighter morning to come. On June 17th, President Biden shared from the White House his words. Juneteenth, we remember our extraordinary capacity to heal, to hope, and to emerge from our worst moments as a stronger, freer, and more just nation. It is also a day that we celebrate the power and resilience of Black Americans. We have endured generations of oppression and the ongoing journey towards equal justice, equal dignity, equal rights, and equal opportunity in America. And I share with you, since the 1800s, Juneteenth has been celebrated by African diaspora communities for decades. We are fortunate that in 2021, it was declared a national holiday. I will end with this statement. I spoke with Dr. Davis, Marcel Davis, earlier today, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And she directed me to the DEI statement VCU's health system has declared. I will read in part. We will actively work to dismantle systemic racism and inequalities that may be entrenched in our health system. I also have the pleasure today of introducing our VCU Health System CEO, Dr. Arthur Kellerman, and Senior Vice President for Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU Health Sciences. Dr. Kellerman has been a strong advocate and proponent for VCU Health System's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion for our patients and our team members. Dr. Kellerman works diligently to ensure VCU Health System is actively involved in the numerous communities we serve and continues to be a leading force in healthcare. Now, I could read you a long list of accolades, research, publications, professional appointments, and more for Dr. Kellerman. So instead of doing that, I want to share a comment that was shared with me recently about him. Quote, I trust Dr. Kellerman will always have our patients and team members as a top priority at VCU Health System. And this is why I will always stay committed to the care I offer our patients and our team. He leads with strength, and I am proud to be a part of this team. Welcome, Dr. Kellerman.
Thank you, Ms. Harris-Duff, and thanks to all of you who are a part of this wonderful celebration today. I am delighted that Juneteenth is finally a federal holiday. taken its rightful place among other holidays that recognize momentous events in our nation's history. VCU Health as an organization is also proud to recognize today because it so powerfully aligns with who we are, what we're about, and our commitment to the communities that we serve, to the Commonwealth, and to every patient, every trainee, every team member that we interact with every day. We are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in every dimension throughout our amazing and dedicated workforce, through our teaching that we provide to health sciences students, resident physicians, and others who come here to work with us and learn and grow, through the skilled, safe, and kind care that all of you provide every day and every night to patients who come to us from all walks of life and from all corners of the Commonwealth and increasingly our nation. And through the steadfast and selfless service that we provide, not only as a health system and as academic units, but as individuals through our volunteer work between our regular work hours, the gifts that we give to our faith communities, to our neighborhoods, to our friends, to people who are in need. I feel a tremendous sense of pride to even be allowed to be a part of that team. And I want to say today, especially, it is fitting that so many descendants of the ancestors that were recognized in the libation ceremony play such pivotal roles in this system at every level, from entry bright-eyed trainees who are just eager to have a chance to make a difference, to folks who are the first people who greet somebody walking into the hospital or being rolled in on a wheelchair or a stretcher, to our most distinguished nursing and physician leaders, superstar researchers, executives of the system, and everybody in between. Your individual triumphs and your spirit and commitment to give back to your community, to every community, and to everyone who comes here is the most powerful affirmation I can imagine of the legacy of endurance, of love, of fortitude through centuries of cruelty and injustice and despair. And yet your ancestors persevered and you triumphed. And I am just glad to be a team member of all of you. And I'm glad today that our nation recognizes that triumph by honoring Juneteenth as a federal holiday. May we always do so forever going forward. So thanks to all of you for being here today and for joining us in the celebration of Juneteenth.
Thank you, Dr. Kellum. And am I on screen? I'm going to take this time to thank Dr. Kellerman for his wonderful words of encouragement. Absolutely, it encouraged me. So now we're going on with the program with our keynote speaker. Mr. Baker is a native of Richmond. He's the principal consultant and CEO of Baker Consulting, which is based in Seattle, Washington. He holds a master's degree in education and a master's degree in psychology. He specializes in leadership development and organizational change. Mr. Baker also co-teaches race-based trauma and equity for the therapists at Seattle University. He conducts workshops on education, mental health, community policing, and homelessness. Mr. Baker's consulting work explores how cultural competency training impacts the ability of an organization and its staff to provide the best service to all people. And so without any further ado, I would like to bring to the webinar, Kevin Baker.
Ashe, thank you so much, Brother Muzi, for that, Brother Philip Branch Muzi, for that introduction. I'm trying to set my timer so that I can make sure I don't go over, and I know I have some help as well to keep me on track. So first, I'd like to thank you, Philip Moosey Branch, for inviting me. I'd like to thank Joanne Harris Duff for supporting me. And I'd like to thank Dr. Art Kellerman for supporting this event and the work that's happening in your organization. First thing I'd like to do with everyone out there is get permission, right? So, also, let me also thank my ancestors and ask my ancestors that would do good for me to guide my thoughts, my words, and my actions, and invite your ancestors to open your hearts to the words that will move you on your journey. What I'd like to ask for everyone out there that's listening is permission to engage. And I like that by if you go to the chat and put in the chat whether you want to hear comfortable lies or uncomfortable truths today. If you could do that right now, that would be helpful. And I know whether I have permission to engage or not. Okay, I'm seeing uncomfortable truths. I'm seeing, okay. Thank you all for that as we go. So the theme today is, let me also, I have to, I'm a little neurodiverse, right? So I tend to go circular. Because the time is short today, only thing I have the opportunity to do is to give you threads that you can pull on later that will then give the opportunity for you to either accept or reject your call for your hero or heroine's journey, which is this work around race equity, accessibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. So the theme today is, what does freedom look like for you? And there's a little bit more that'll come later. My title today is Truth Ain't Hate. Truth ain't hate. For me, when we talk about freedom, it's really about the liberating of our minds that have been shackled. Juneteenth is about celebration. We must learn to celebrate the fortitude and resistance of our ancestors and how they moved and how they were here and did all of the things that they did and survived. And give homage to those who lost their lives and gave up their lives. Remembering also that enslavement was a condition that we endured. It was not our beginning. We must remember and recognize that. Also recognizing that being proud African people who are the origins of creation, we have to also look and examine our worldviews and understand that we come from a worldview of oneness and spirituality being our root. And also remember that the father of Western thought came to Africa to learn. So education is an African concept and not a European concept. Often I hear when we think about Juneteenth, it was the freeing of African Americans. And I want to just kind of remind everyone that we didn't become African Americans until 1988. So they didn't free any African Americans. They freed Africans, kidnapped, enslaved Africans. That's important. Truth ain't hate. I'm going to share 2 slides really quickly because, you know, I only have a few minutes and, you know, I got my timer on, people timing me, so I can only show them for a few minutes, just enough for you to get a good glimpse at them. And because they're important for us to understand. Because when we think about freedom, we have to also think about our condition and the condition that took away that freedom. So for those of us here in this country that we call the United States of America, it's that beautiful chocolate cake in the middle. Y'all like cake? I love cake, love chocolate cake. So look at this cake that we call the United States of America. And look at all of these ingredients that went into the creation of this beautiful cake called the United States of America. Racism, sexism, white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia, colonialism, classism, xenophobia, capitalism. All of these ingredients went into the making, the baking of this cake. Now, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and celebration, we're really talking about taking these ingredients out of the cake. So what I'd like for you all to do as we contemplate freedom is just imagine this cake sitting in front of you. And what I'd like for you to do is to take your hands and just imagine putting them in that cake to take out racism, to take out sexism, to take out colonialism. And then just imagine what that cake is going to look like when you pull your hands out. Also, as a reminder, just a timeline to understand how long we've been dealing with this. When we think about the racialized mindset in this country, it is well over 500 years. Because those were the times when papal bulls were given, colonialism began, or continued rather. And when the first Spaniards arrived in Santo Domingo, now the Dominican Republic, with kidnapped, enslaved Africans. Here, often in the US, we go back to 1619, which was the beginning of British enslavement in this hemisphere and this colony, right? So the mindset is well over 500 years when we think about enslavement hitting this hemisphere. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing right now. I want you to think about those as we continue to move. So one of the noticings that I have had as I have seen, heard, and listened to people on the East Coast talk about what you all call DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, what I call REDI, right? Race, equity, accessibility, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. What I often hear is the term being used, anti-discrimination. We want to become anti-discrimination, anti-discriminatory. And I say, that's interesting language. The question becomes, what is the path to anti-discrimination? To get there, we must deal with racism. So therefore, we must work to become anti-racist and understand what all of that means to create an anti-racist society, right? There's no way to get to anti-discrimination without understanding how we show up in the world and deal with not only the racist past of this country, but how racism shows up in the world, in our workplace, in our environments, and how to deal with that. Now, when we think about becoming anti-racist and dealing with racism and getting to liberation through that, then we have to also think about decolonization. This world is built on colonialism and a colonialistic mindset. So we have to decolonize our minds. For African-American, African, Black people, the question becomes, what's necessary for us to unchain our minds? What's necessary for us to unchain, unshackle our minds? For white people, the question is, what do you need to do to neutralize the mindset and the belief that you are better than? And what is also necessary to deal with the fragility that so often comes up when having critical conversations. For other BIPOC individuals and immigrants, the question becomes, what's necessary to grow an understanding of how colonialism has impacted you? And how do you deal with the desire for assimilation and acculturation? Remember, truth ain't hate. When in conversations, we need to begin to unravel a few questions. One of the things that I often hear when having critical conversations about race and talking about liberation, I often hear this term that says that, well, we're all human. And sometimes I question that. Are we all human? Sometimes what I see in the world, I question whether we're all human or not. The other thing is that we tend to take being human as a birthright. And I believe that we need to change that mindset. Being human is not a birthright. It is a maturation process. We must work to become human. Part of that maturation process calls for several things. One is time. Two is the openness to learning about other cultures and other worldviews. Three is a self-reflective process. How am I showing up in the world? How am I with others? And when we begin to think about other cultural ways of being and worldviews, I think about my elder brother, Dr. Edwin Nichols. And we must begin to study his work more intensely and his theories around the psychological aspects of cultural difference. I'm going to show you a slide. I'm going to share screen again really quickly because we don't have time to waste, right? Wait a minute, let me go back and redo, and let me see. Pull the slide up, okay. I'm not going to have time to go in and explain this slide fully. But it's important just to understand when we begin to think about worldviews and the value systems that come with those worldviews, right? When we think about the European, white Americans, generally the relationship is to member to the object, and the value is counting and measuring in the ways of knowing. Now, I know a lot of you out there, when you do your reports, You want to know how many people did you serve? How many did we touch? We must begin to ask, how well are we serving people? And how will we know when their lives have changed? And is it better to serve 5 very well or 100 not well at all? Questions for us to ponder. When we think about us as African people, our relationship or our highest value is member to member. It's all about the relationship and how we are with one another. This is why, and our interdependence, which is why we're always striving for unity. I'm going to stop sharing. So these value systems are important so that we can understand the worldview of this society that we're in that has shackled our minds. And we must also understand the origin of our worldview. So for white people, we have to understand that colonialism, that acquisition of the object, member to the object, acquisition of the object is important. And that upholds this individualistic mindset that often spurs capitalism. And we see some benefits, and we also see a lot of the harms that come with that. For Black people, we've had the suppression or the stripping away of culture, whichever term you may prefer. And we have to understand the impact of that and also begin to understand the importance of identity. Who are we? Started out as African, became Negroes, Black, African American. Do we know who we are? What's necessary for us to free our minds, to unshackle our minds? Identity is key. And we must also understand our collective and our interdependent way of being versus the independent way that we have adapted in this society. We must also understand and look at the impacts of race-based trauma and cultural trauma and how those have impacted and affected us physically and affected us mentally. I'm going to close with a story about a crab. See, the crabs came to me one day and said, Kevin, we have a problem with the way that we're being represented. So every time that something happens, you know, and in Black community, folks say, look at them crabs pulling each other down. No. See, what you have to understand is that the crab has been misrepresented. The crab is an interdependent and collectivist creature, and they work together endlessly. Now, what does that mean? So now I'm gonna be looking over because I have to read it, so I want to make sure I say everything and I have it there right. So the crab in those barrels are constantly seeking liberation. When they're climbing up, their effort is to latch on to each other and create a bridge so that the rest behind them can crawl over for liberation. So we have to then notice and begin to examine the design of what we want to call the captor or the barrel. When we see that it's slick on the sides, there's nothing to grab hold to. So they try and they try and they try, but there's nothing to grab. So as they grab each other to build that bridge for liberation, they slide back down. Now let's liken that barrel to white supremacy. So when we think about liberating our minds from the oppression that we endure, we have to understand that it is because of white supremacy culture that we feel it, and it is that barrel that is keeping us oppressed. Oftentimes today with these shootings, we want to talk about the quote unquote white supremacist. The white supremacist is not the problem. They are a symptom of a system that upholds white supremacy culture. And guess what? We all are swimming in those waters. And it impacts each and every one of us.
4
So
minutes,
ultimately,
Mr. Baker.
thank you. So ultimately, we must improve our strategy and understand that our strategy is not only economics for liberation, but it is also cultural awareness of who we are and identity development. We must overcome and get out of this barrel that we call white supremacy, because it is killing all of us, Black people, white people, indigenous peoples, our new immigrants that come here. It is killing all of us. And remember, truth ain't hate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Truth ain't hate. And the crab has been misrepresented. We will overcome this barrel, because you are right, it is killing us all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am simply moved, and I know you all are as well. Your words are powerful, and they will stay with us for years to come. Absolutely powerful. I don't know about other folks on this call, but I'm happy to be part of the bridge that is a bridge of crabs, and I know we will make sure that we make it over the barrel. Yes, we will. The last few minutes of our program, we will be inviting 2 other presenters that will join Mr. Baker and Mrs. Bell. We put together a generational panel, so we wanted to make sure that we were thinking broadly and inclusively about who we invited to the table. And so let me share the 2 individuals who will be joining us today. So we have Mrs. Kimberly Carter. Mrs. Kimberly Carter is internationally known people first enthusiast and human resources professional with over 18 years of excellent client HR operations, change management, project management, employee customer experience design, and process optimization experience. She is also the recipient of the United States Office of Secretary of Defense Patriot Award. Mrs. Carter is a thought leader who is an action-oriented with strong communication with technology, executive, business audiences. She is known for her dynamic collaboration to support organizational needs, goals, and best interests while still maximizing workforce quality. Mrs. Carter has been an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion for nearly 20 years, and both in her professional life in the corporate international level, as well as in her local community. This is evident in her continued professional growth and involvement in the corporate human resources field. Welcome, Mrs. Carter. I am also excited to introduce Mr. Duron Tardy. Mr. Tardy is a member of management within a nationwide retail organization. Mr. Tardy graduated at the top of his class from a private liberal arts institution, Bridgewater College, with a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration. Mr. Tardy, you're in good company. There are several Bridgewater graduates here at VCU Health. He has been a leader and advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion for over 8 years, and throughout both his college tenure and local community. He served as a president of the Black Student Association and founder and president of the Diversity League. He served as a leader in residential living and learning as a resident assistant and created numerous diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, including Juneteenth. He remains very passionate and dedicated to making an impact and difference, not only within his workplace, but yes, throughout the community. Welcome, Mr. Tardy. Welcome, Mrs. Carter. So today, we have a question for all of our panelists. And it's a question that we've been talking about throughout this hour. And so I would love for you to answer this question. And we can start with Mrs. Carter. And the question is, in keeping with the Juneteenth theme, liberation, what does freedom look like to you for the African American community today and in the future? What does that look like?
Well, thank you, Ms. Harris-Duff, and all of the panelists and everyone who's able to join us today. Thank you for inviting me to this wondrous occasion. I'm really excited to be here. I want to do a quick sound check because I've been having some challenges with my computer, so it'll ensure that, okay, great.
Sounds great.
Well, I think it's a really great question, right? I think freedom can mean a variety of things to a lot of individuals. For me in particular, it speaks volumes to how I would want to be perceived, right? As well as how I interact with with others, as well as how my children are perceived and interact with one another, with others, as well as having access, right? You know, I think of as a professional in the corporate environment, each time I enter a workspace, whether it's in a virtual environment or whether it's in person, I find myself doing the scan. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that, right? You immediately start to identify, okay, who looks like me, who potentially may be an advocate, right, in this space. And it would be great to not have to do that, right? You know, but it is almost instinctual to have to do that when you enter a space or feel that you need to do that. But freedom would be not having to do that, right? To walk into a space, whether it's in a corporate environment or whether it's in a personal space, and just immediately feel comfortable and know that my voice matters and knows that everyone around the table will have a seat at the table at all times and that their voice matters as well. It's also not having to at all times be strong and carry the weight of everyone and everything. And as a Black woman, as a wife, as a mother of 3 children, it is pretty much a requirement, right? It has been ingrained in me since childhood that I need to remain strong, remain resilient. And quite honestly, I am, you know, but there are times where, you know, it would be nice to lean on someone, right? Or to lean on others. And I have that in my husband and my children, but there's also when I enter the world and in society, I have to keep that wall up, right? I have to remain resilient in some level of strength that perhaps others who may not look like me, you know, they have a tendency to allow themselves to let down those walls where I do not have that option, you know. Freedom is also for my 3 children to be able to seek access and obtain access to the same education as others, to obtain access to the same level of jobs and areas of expertise as others, right? For my 6 foot tall, darker skinned son who's athletic to walk down the street at any hour and not be seen as a threat, right? For him to be able to play with others who are his age and not be seen as physically intimidating because he is, 15, but athletic build, right? He's not necessarily any more intimidating than any other individual, right? He's still a child, right? But in our society, he is often seen as a threat, as many other young Black males, right? And they often have a target on their back. So freedom would be not having to be seen as a threat, and for my young girls to be young women and to not have to remain strong at all times and go against the grain, right? Just to get a seat at the table with their counterparts when they enter their secondary or higher education. It's just ultimately having access to the same things that everyone else has access to. And then being able to be your authentic self, showing up as who I am at all times, not code switching. I'm sure we're all familiar with that, right? When you feel as though you have to code switch, whether it is speaking differently or showing up differently, but ultimately just being my true authentic self and that being accepted.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I appreciate
Welcome.
that. Being accepted, absolutely. And yes, many of us know what code switching is. Many of us know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Tardy.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Harris, for having me, panelists, and those that are listening and watching. I'm grateful to be here today. Mrs. Carter hit so many points, and I'm just like, dang, I should have went before her. But all reigned very true and resonate with me as well, especially being someone of the younger generation and social media being a big factor in that, and just kind of like being an influence on one another, just growing up amongst like peer pressure and things as such. Again, like freedom looks like she said, having equal and equitable opportunities, to be at the table and have those opportunities that, peers that may not look like me or act like me or talk like me have. Being able to, of course, when I'm driving down the road, not tense up when I drive by a police officer or drive by someone, even if they're driving behind me, to feel comfortable knowing that, if I were to be stopped or something like that, they're there to check on me and not see me as a threat or want to make me a threat as well. In addition, like I said, I spoke on social media. So in that aspect of, being able to share my opinion, our opinion, freely and in a way where it's not judged or misconstrued as if, I'm just solely, speaking to, push an agenda, but simply have an opinion about what matters to me and what I'm passionate about, because not only being an advocate, for the Black community, but those that also, don't have the same opportunities as well, LGBTQ community, Asian Americans, so much more. And then in addition, of course, also, as Ms. Carter mentioned as well, in the workplace, like you said, you come in and, like I said, very much when she mentioned that scan, that rang very true, because it's just natural, because you want to feel like, when you see other people that look like you and, are in that same room or at that table, it feels like, okay, I'm not the only one who was able to get to this point. Or you don't feel as if you had to, truly crawl and just, beat your way to the table or up to the top, knowing that, okay, they had the same opportunities as me and didn't have to, act out of character or step into, the stereotypes that most people put on the community. And then going into the future, setting that precedence for my future family, whoever may, become my partner in the future. And knowing that no matter what, we're seen as equal, and as always, feeling comfortable and knowing that, we are who we are no matter what, and can be, again, our true and authentic selves. Thank you all so much again.
Thank you, Mr. Tardy. Thank you so much. Those are absolutely powerful words. Absolutely. Be ourselves, not tense up, right? Not tense up. Mrs. Bell.
Thank you. It's been really thought-provoking to hear all of the comments this morning. And I hope that our viewers will take some of these things to heart as we go through our days. And as I've listened to the comments, what comes to mind to me, and it was touched upon, is authenticity and identity. But as Mr. Baker said, do we know? Because the system that we have been socialized to exist in does not provide that information. Do we seek it? Do we know there's something to seek? So freedom then has an internal side and also an external side. We've been talking a lot today about the reactive view of freedom and liberation from the systemic viewpoint. That as we continue to work together, we may make some changes systemically. Based on the history that we all know, my concern is that those changes will be slow. However, what about the power that we carry inside? Regardless of where we walk, regardless of the rooms we walk into, regardless of who we encounter, regardless of the articles that we read in the newspaper or see in the television, what about our internal self-view? Do we love ourselves? Are we connected with our heritage? Do we know the beauty and spirit of Africa and our African legacy? Do we walk in that pride, in that light? Do we recognize the uniqueness that we carry in our cultural traditions? Do we identify with African people who have been innovators in every aspect of life? Do we look in the mirror and see ourselves as such? Do we love ourselves? Do we love ourselves and care for ourselves so that we are concerned about the diets that we choose, not the one to make that cake, but the diets that we choose to maintain our health and our vitality? Do we choose what stimuli we take in on the television, or as some people say, the television? Do we care for our attitudes? Are we optimistic? Are we optimistic? Do we recognize that we are all God carriers? If God has entered the world through each of us, there's a reggae artist, Tony Rebel. He has a song that says, in the Rastafarians refer to God as Jah. In the song, he says, if Jah is standing by my side, then why should I be afraid of the pestilence that crawleth by night? If we see ourselves and recognize that God has entered the world through us, how can we not be light? How can we not be love? How can we not be joy, even in spite of and within the system of racism and capitalism and all of the isms that were created to dismiss us. Otherwise, we continue to be stressed and ill, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Don't let us live our lives that way, even though we live in a situation. Let's be light, resonate in the light, exude light, be optimistic, and say thank you to those upon whose shoulders we stand, recognizing that we are opening a place for the children that we see coming. We cannot give to them the same disparities that we contend with. We cannot.
Thank you, Mrs. Bell. That was beautiful. Yes, walk in the light and the hope. That is, you had my eyes filled. Thank you. That was beautiful. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Thank you. Special thank you to our panelists. Such a beautiful thank you to, excuse me, to Mr. Baker, our keynote, Mrs. Carter, Dr. Kellerman, thank you, Muzi, Mr. Tardy. There's so many beautiful people here today. Thank you to everyone who joined us. I really encourage everyone to continue to participate in arts and healthcare programs in the department, the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion programs. We love to see you. For those who you know, your colleagues who weren't able to be here today, please ask them to go to our intranet so they can watch this beautiful program. It's been lovely. I appreciate you all, and I hope you have a beautiful Juneteenth. Thank you, everyone.